disconnect us from who we are and put us in a false sense of self-identity, hypnotizing us to believe a lie about our very self. Who is behind it? Well, we can talk about that in a second. And I'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, between these two pictures is 20 years. And I've seen enormous changes in that time. So many people have gone from this to this. And they've realized that the world is heading for a fascist global state or a communist global state, because the two are basically different ways of describing the same centralized dictatorship. And this says, wake up and smell the fascism. People are beginning to see that the police state, the Orwellian state, is unfolding. But then, this comes the question. When you see how it's coming in all these multi different ways, via manipulation of education, by manipulated wars and manipulating leaders, the pharmaceutical cartel, manipulated terrorist events, manipulated global warming, control of the media, all this stuff that we're being given to eat and drink to destabilize us, then there's no way that all that is being orchestrated by men in dark suits sitting around a table. And this is where I part company with so many people who are researching this, because that is not how it works, I would suggest. Yes, there is a level at which men in dark suits are orchestrating this, but that's still at the play-out level. It's not at the level that it's being orchestrated from. So there's the level of manipulation of our daily lives, which I'll get to in the next section after this. There's another level, which is the manipulation of the human society through various bloodlines by non-human entities. There's another level where we realize the nature of reality and what it really is. And then there's the other level, which just started to come in my life in the last 6 to 9 months, and that is the moon is not what it seems to be. And I'm going to go through some of this in this section. The rabbit hole is so much deeper than people who just researched the 5 sense level of this have realized. But, you know, that ridicule I went through at the start of this journey 20 years ago was absolutely essential for me, because it cleaned out that fear and concern of what other people thought of what I was saying, because they were laughing anyway. Because you don't talk about the moon not being like it is, and you don't talk about non-human entities manipulating this world if you still got that concern with what people think of you. Anyway, the whole basis of it is control of perception, control of the way we see the world, manipulating the way that we decode and decode reality, keeping us from our true self, which is this disembodied awareness, and putting us in this box or bubble of limitation, and controlling the way we decode reality so that we see the world as the control system wants us to see it. That's the whole basis, but there are many levels of it. Yes, on one level, there is a group of people, lots of groups of people, sitting round tables deciding the next move. But you go beyond them and you go into the shadowy area of advisors, who you don't see very much, but where the real power lies in politics. You go deeper still, and you're into the shadowy, shadowy world of secret societies, which you certainly don't see. And eventually, you are entering other dimensions that are manipulating this reality, our dimension, shall we say, from outside. They seem to take overwhelmingly a reptilian expression, but also the so-called greys are very much involved. And they operate just outside of our frequency range, but they can come into it, which is why people see people appear and disappear, and they see UFOs appear and disappear, as I mentioned earlier. So we are in this frequency range, being manipulated from just beyond it through various bloodlines. Satanism is part of it, which I'll get to in the third section, but the idea is to enclose us in this frequency range and then manipulate us to become slaves to their agenda. Orion is an area that comes up regularly. Same with the Draco constellation. Same with Sirius, and the same with Mars. Mars was an inhabited planet in much more recent times than science would have us believe. Now, I'm talking about reptilian entities mainly, and the greys and stuff, but there are endless other non-human entities in existence and interacting with this planet. Some malevolent, some benevolent, some neutral. And when I talk about these constellations and other planets, I'm not necessarily just talking about them in this frequency range that we decode visible light. I'm talking about other levels of reality that these planets and constellations exist on. For instance, we think we're on planet Earth, but we're only decoding that part of planet Earth that resonates with visible light. There's many more levels than planet Earth than the one that we're decoding. The other thing that came up in the research over the 20 years, and you find this mentioned in ancient accounts all over the world, is an interbreeding between this non-human race and humans, creating another form of human, and even a particular race of hybrid humans, which I'll get to in a second. Now, like I say, this description can be found all over the world, in all these different ancient cultures. And it can be found in the Bible, where it talks about there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became the mighty men, which were the old men of renown. This was the hybrid race they called the Nephilim. And whenever you look at the stories around the world relating to the fall of man, the descendants from where we were to what we've become, you have a reptilian element in it. Of course, the classic is the Garden of Eden and the serpent and all that, but you find it all over the world, the fall of man being related to reptilian. Before this intervention came, this world was very different. The ancients talked about a golden age where humans were connected to nature, when they were connected to a higher awareness. And when I look at the descriptions of what the earth was like at that time, it's very, very similar to that portrayed in the Avatar movie, where the blue people were connected to nature and everything was connected to everything else and everything worked as one whole unit. But then came what I call the schism. A vibrational waveform metaphysical universe from which that information is decoded into this holographic world became subjected to a massive distortion. And how that came about, I'll get to in this section. But this distortion in the metaphysical universe was decoded out to change the nature of life on this planet as it had been before. This schism manifested out as what this world has become. Wars, people dying of hunger in a world of plenty. It's all about me, conflict, argument, dissension. And there became also a schism in the human personality, which changed the nature of humans emotionally and mentally. And we moved from this to this as a result of this distortion. There was also genetic manipulation of humanity to change the nature of the genetics that we had before. And the reason for that I'll come to. In fact, one of the main reasons for it was to change the frequency band that humans could decode, put us in a smaller band than we were in before. And basically what this did was lock us into a frequency range which acts to this day like a prison. Tiny band of frequency we call visible light. Now, as I just mentioned, the other thing that happened is that there was specific breeding between these reptilian entities and humans, creating a hybrid bloodline. This hybrid bloodline became known under different names. They became known as the demigods. You read about them in history, the demigods. The demigods, because the reptilian entities were perceived as gods, the demigods were perceived as part human, part god, therefore demigods. These hybrid bloodlines became the royal families and aristocracy of the various cultures, where they claim the right to rule because of their bloodline, their connection to the gods. Ancient Chinese emperors claimed the right to be emperor because of their genetic descendants from what they called the serpent gods. In Britain today, we still have a head of state, Queen Elizabeth II, who is only head of state because of her bloodline, because of her genetics. And so we have this manipulation of the DNA, creating this hybrid bloodline, and that's the caduceus, the symbol of the medical profession to this day, very appropriately. I know people say it symbolizes Kundalini energy and all that, but it's very appropriately also symbolizes the input in reptilian genetics. Because the DNA is a software program. And these hybrid bloodlines have a software program that is much more reptilian than the general run of the population. And because everything is a vibration, if there is a genetic compatibility between the reptilian gods, or what I'll call the serpent gods, and humans, or their hybrids, human bloodlines, then there is a vibrational compatibility, which is very, very significant, as I'll get to in a second. Now, one of the key things to remember about this hybrid DNA is that something was removed from the normal DNA, and that is an ability to have empathy with the people who suffer the consequences of your actions. If you think about it, if you remove empathy from the human psyche, human feelings, there are no limitations. If I have empathy with people in Iraq, I cannot possibly order the pepper bombing of Baghdad. If I have no empathy, I have no problem with that whatsoever. And these bloodlines, what I'll call the Illuminati bloodlines, the serpent hybrid bloodlines, the ones that or behind the control system, they have no empathy. That explains so much about what they do. So, because this hybrid genetics has a vibrational sympathy, compatibility with these entities that operate just outside of human sight, it means that these entities can possess, an ancient theme, these particular hybrid bloodlines in ways that they cannot with the general population. And what it means is if you manipulate the bloodline, the apparently human level operating within 5 sense sight, into positions of power, what you're doing is putting these entities into positions of power. But because when we look at people, we see the human level because that's all we're decoding. We don't realize who the real power structure is behind who we think is the power structure. Now, like I say, the theme of possession, often possession by reptilian-type entities, is an ancient theme all over the world. And what it means is that when someone meets, and I've not put Father George Bush there by accident, by the way, when you meet someone from these hybrid bloodlines, you're decoding the level of them that operates within the frequency range that you're decoding. So you see apparently a human. Hello, George. But if you could see, and some psychics can, if you could see just beyond that, in terms of your visual acuity, you would see an entity overshadowing this that looked anything but human. And I've met people with psychic sight all over the world that have seen this. So what you're looking at is a human level that we decode, but behind it is something that's anything but human, that is controlling, most of the time anyway, the mental and emotional responses of that person. The other thing that psychics around the world have told me they've seen is like an ethereal reptilian entity overshadowing humans and locking in to these bottom two vortex points, chakra points. Again, a form of possession. Now you can symbolize what I'm saying here like this. You know when you see scientists working in a laboratory and they're working with material that is too dangerous to touch. So what they do is they stand outside of the tank and they put those long gloves on and they work inside the tank while they are on the outside. Well, if you look at this in vibrational terms, that's what's happening. These entities are operating outside of this frequency range, but through these hybrid vehicles with which they have vibrational connection, they can manipulate this world very similar to this. And Neil Haig, my artist friend, symbolizes these bloodlines and the Illuminati secret society network. And this will be a common theme through the next few sections, as this bearded man. But behind the bearded man is the reptilian entities who are controlling. Now, when you go back to the ancient world, to the ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, Indus Valley, and China, you see this continual theme of reptilian gods in the ancient world who interbred with humans. And this is a key area that comes up in so much research. The area we now call Iraq, that was thousands of years ago known as Sumer. And ancient tablets were found in Sumer, which when translated, talk of a non-human race called the Anunnaki, who came and interbred with humans, creating hybrid bloodlines, etc., and controlled the ancient world. That is a theme you find all over the world. This is just the Sumer version of it. And these hybrid bloodlines then, throughout what we call history, expanded up further into Europe, where they became the royal families and aristocracy of Europe, and so on. And these bloodlines today take the form of people like this. certainly the House of Rothschild, which is one of the major players in this control system. British royal family too, the Rockefeller family and others around the world that control the banking system, etc. Now, when these bloodlines had taken over Europe, basically, not least places like Britain and France, then came this vast expansion across the world of the European colonial empires, not least the British Empire, which was so vast they said the sun never set. And then there came a point more recently where the colonial powers of Europe appeared to withdraw from the former colonies. But that was just on the surface. There's two forms of control. There's control you can see, touch and taste: communism, fascism, apartheid. The people under that control know they're under control, and at some point, it might take a long time, they will rebel against that control. The greatest form of control is control you cannot see, living in a prison cell you cannot see the bars of, because people don't rebel against not being free when they think they are. And what happened when the colonial powers apparently withdrew from America, South America, Australia, Africa, is the bloodline was left out there, and the secret society network through which the bloodline manipulates and puts itself in power, and they've gone on controlling those countries ever since, not least the United States of America. And what they've created is this secret society equivalent of a transnational corporation. You have, with a transnational corporation, a headquarters, and you have subsidiaries in the different countries. The subsidiaries run their operation in line with the centrally dictated blueprint. So if you go into the Czech Republic, you'll see the same McDonald's as you'll see in London, etc. What they've done, these bloodlines, is they've created a structure like that, only with secret societies and bloodline families. The headquarters is in Europe, what I call the spider. It's in London and Paris and major European centres, at operational level anyway. And then in the different countries, you've got networks of secret societies and bloodline families whose job it is to run those countries in line with the centrally dictated blueprint. Because of this, I've been to 50 countries researching this over the last 20 years, and I find the same things happening. Sometimes, you know, some places earlier than others, but the same things happening everywhere. And this is how it's possible, because of this transnational corporation of secret societies and bloodlines. You can also symbolize it as a spider's web, with the non-human entities in the center, the spider, but here, very close to the spider, the House of Rothschild and other families, but particularly the Rothschilds. And in the web, you've got all these different elements of society, which to us, in the general run of the population, seem unconnected. But through this network of secret societies, etc., they're not unconnected. They're being dictated to and orchestrated from the center. That's how they can run what this globalization situation, where all these things are happening all over the world at the same time, to centralize power. So when we see all these different companies, these are different masks on that face. You know, you see different companies, they appear to be in competition with each other, like oil companies, pharmaceutical companies, but in fact, they're all owned by the same people, or controlled by the same people. Now, this is the kind of structure symbolized by Neil Haig, where you've got the reptilians operating outside of human sight. He's had them fighting with each other, because these reptilian entities fight among each other all the time, apparently, for power. I guess it's their mentality. And then down here, through the hybrid bloodline of the Illuminati, it comes down into what we say mainstream society, the movie. And so we see apparently different sides in politics and stuff, but actually ultimately they're controlled by the same force. So you have these non-human entities operating through these bloodlines, these possessed bloodlines, at the top of these different pyramids of different countries, and they will control the politics, the finance, the media, the military, the religion, and obviously royalty within these pyramids. And here's the people under this edifice of power. And when these people fight each other or order wars, they don't go and fight them. They go and fight them. You know, if George Bush had have been in Iraq when the first bullet was fired, he'd have been under a bed in Houston when the second one went off. They don't fight the wars, they get us to fight them. And when we stop fighting them, it's all over. So these people are like, seem so powerful, are just like pieces in a chess game, being moved around, useful for a while and then away they go. They're like masks, like shells for these entities to use to manipulate this reality. That says no signal, by the way. Some batches are obviously better than others, you know. So if you take the symbolism of the Trojan horse coming into that society with all the real stuff hidden inside, well, if you put this face on it, you're pretty much describing what's going on here. We're being controlled by a force we cannot see and don't even accept exists. And like I say, this is why I had to be cleared out in my experience of concern of what people thought of me and what I say. Otherwise, you don't put this stuff out. Because you think, what will people think of me? I don't mind. I don't care. They have a right to think what they like. Someone sent me this, and I'm not saying these are reptilian eyes. It could be just, you know, a trick of the light. But someone sent me this, and what it portrays is what people all over the world have told me they've seen, where people's eyes turn from human to reptilian. And interestingly, I've got a friend who operates in medicine and science, who has an associate who has been doing, I don't agree with it, but he's been doing a long research project developing iris scan equipment. And he didn't know my friend knew me, and he certainly didn't know about me. But he said to my friend, you know the strangest thing when I was doing this research? He said, I looked down a microscope at 2,300 eyes, and around 4% appeared to be of reptilian type and appearance. And it's funny, that figure of 4 to 5% is what keeps recurring over the years in terms of the percentage of the population that we're talking about. And many of that 4 or 5% will not even be aware that they're of the bloodline either. Here's another one that you find on the internet of Father George Bush. Again, could well be just a play on the light, but that just shows what people see. Inside these people are something else. What's behind the eyes? Mr. Fake Smile, Mr. Fake Emotion, Mr. Dark Eyes Blare. What's behind the painted smile? This guy, Ted Heath, was Prime Minister of Britain from 1970 to 74 and signed us into the European Union as it's become. And before I was into any of this, I was just a national spokesman for the Green Party and working for the BBC. But in 1989, the Green Party in Britain in the European elections had a good result, as a result of which I was asked onto a television program for the results coming in live, because they knew we were going to do well. I arrived at the studio, and the lady met me, and she said, I'll take you into makeup. Fair enough. So I walked into the makeup room, the door's open like that. It could have been like that, but I think it was like that, you know. And she led me to my seat, and she says, someone will be along in a minute, walks out. I think I'm on my own, I can't see anybody. And then something caught my eye, and I looked across, and here's this guy, Ted Heath, former Prime Minister of Britain. He was behind the door, waiting for his makeup to be taken off. He's just been on the programme. And I looked at him, and I said, All right, mate, nice to meet you. In this whole conversation, he never said a word. He was facing the mirror, I was there, and he turned his chair. Like I say, I'm not into any of this at the time. It's not 1990 yet. And he looked at me, and his eyes started at the top of my head and slowly, slowly scanned to my feet, scanned back again to the top of my head, and then turned and looked at the mirror. Not a word said. Now that was kind of startling enough, but this is what I saw when his eyes were scanning my body. Everything went totally black, including the whites, and I described it to my family when I got home. I said it was like looking into two black holes, and what I meant by that was, we have this thing we call eye contact, where you make eye contact with someone. When I looked into his eyes as he was doing this stuff, there was no contact. I was looking through him into some other dimension. That's what I would see it now. I didn't at the time. I didn't know what was happening. But as I've traveled around the world, I've had a number of people talk to me about having the experience of the black-eyed people. And I thought, I know exactly what you mean. So behind the human is something very different as we go through these people. There you go, look at that. Lovely eyes she's got, isn't she? Lovely eyes. And again, I emphasize, this DNA has no capacity for empathy. Now, when I started on this trek of this reptilian theme, as the pieces kept being handed to me, I was shocked to find how much evidence there is. That says in our face, and it is in our face. The oldest form of religious worship currently has been discovered is serpent worship. It goes back at least 70,000 years, according to mainstream science and anthropology. And that 70,000 years place is here, the border of Botswana and Namibia, a place called the Tsalido Hills, where the bush people who live in that area say modern humans were created by the great serpent, the great python, who, it's said, appeared with a bag of eggs to seed the modern humanity. Now this man, the Reverend John Bathurst Dean, wrote a book in 1933 called Worship of the Serpent. Some wonderful books were written in the early part of the 20th century, which have long been forgotten. And what he did was looked at serpent worship all over the world, and this is what he concluded. It appears then that no nations were so geographically remote or so religiously discordant, but that one and only one superstitious characteristic was common to all, that the most civilized and the most barbarous bowed down with the same devotion to the same engrossing deity, and that this deity either was or was represented by the same sacred serpent. It appears also that in most, if not all, the civilized countries where this serpent was worshipped, some fable or tradition which involved his history, directly or indirectly, alluded to the fall of man in paradise, what I said earlier, in which the serpent was concerned. What follows then, but that the most ancient account respecting the cause and nature of this seduction must be the one from which all the rest are derived, which represent the victorious serpent, victorious over man in a state of innocence, and subduing his soul in a state of sin, as this reverend would say, into the most abject veneration and adoration of himself. You find depictions of the serpent gods around the world. This is one found in the Ubaid culture, which preceded Sumer in what we now call Iraq. These are the depictions in Asia of what they call the Nagas, part human, part serpent, as they were said. There's the Nagas again. In Europe, the Druids worshipped a god called Yu, a serpent god called Yu, which if you play that on, Yu man means serpent man. The serpent worship goes on and on. Same with ancient Egypt. The serpent, so much so that they depicted their pharaohs in serpent style. There's the cobra. The cobra is a common symbol of these serpent gods in the ancient world. The headdress is of the cobra headdress, or you know, what the cobra looks like. And there's the belly of the cobra coming down from the chin. And I say this is a universal. In Central America, they worshipped Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god. The Mayans in Central America had a version of the same called Kukulkan. And then, of course, throughout the Far East, the dragon is absolutely the symbol of many countries, and the dragon comes from the serpent gods, I would suggest. And folklore is full of serpent legends. When I went to South Africa, in the latter part of the 1990s, about 1997 I went first, then 98. In 98, I brought a book out called The Biggest Secret, in which I mentioned this serpent connection for the first time. And Credo Mutwa contacted me while I was in South Africa and said, I must talk to you, I must talk to you. So I went to see him, and he said, how do you know about the Chitahuri? I said, who's the Chitahuri? And Chitahuri translates as, in one way it translates as the children of the serpent, or the children of the python. And he told me how he had learned decades and decades and decades ago, when he joined the secret societies that were created in the black societies when the Europeans came. The Europeans wanted to kill the shaman and destroy the knowledge. Not all the Europeans, but the powers. And so the knowledge went underground into secret societies, and he joined them quite early in his life and got access to them. And what was he told about? That the world is controlled by serpent entities hiding behind human form. This, unfortunately, was stolen recently. It's called the Necklace of the Mysteries. It's not a necklace, though. It goes on your shoulders, and it is incredibly heavy. And the reason it's heavy is that it was made to last. And it's mentioned in accounts 500 years ago, the Necklace of the Mysteries, and Credo reckons it's at least 1,000 years old. And what it depicts, he was telling me, is the story of Africa, indeed the story of the world in the same way, through symbols hanging from it. Here you've got a human woman. There you've got what is, when you see it, you know, sideways up, is exactly like a flying saucer. There you've got a hand with the eye on it and the constellation of Orion. And then you've got this figure, this strange non-human figure, and various other ones there. Now, this non-human figure is in come and get me mode, shall we say. And this penis, Credo was telling me, used to be gold. But someone stole it for financial reasons, and they had replaced it with a copper one. But gold, one of the kind of central stories, myths of Egypt, is the story of the golden penis of Osiris. And how Isis put him all together again, but couldn't find the penis and all that stuff. And it's exactly the same story in southern Africa, using different names. There's the eye. It's significant in a minute. So there's the human lady, and here's the non-human figure. And he said, that's the Chitahuri. And I said to him, well, it doesn't look very reptilian to me. He says, that looks very strange. And he said, well, this is the reason. The serpent gods said, you must never depict us as we really look, or else. And although you find some depictions, they're overwhelmingly symbolic, like snakes and stuff like that. Or, as he said, this was made to make sure that people realized it wasn't human, but without depicting what it really was. And when I was writing my latest book, this man, Pierre Sabac, it's the name he writes under, contacted me through a friend and told me about the book he was writing called The Murder of Reality, Hidden Symbolism of the Dragon. And it's a very deep book and takes a lot of concentration, but it's fascinating. He spent nearly 7 years reading through dictionaries in different languages to decode the serpent gods hidden in other symbolic forms. For instance, he shows in the book how the eagle was used to symbolically depict the serpent gods. And if you're an insider, they give you this knowledge. If you're not, you think it's just about an eagle. The owl is one of the symbols. The hawk or the falcon and angels is symbolic of these serpent gods. And so you get the eagle being used very, very widely to depict the logos or images of countries, not least the United States. The goddess of Babylon, Semiramis or Ishtar, where we get Easter from, she was depicted with owls. Horus, the son of God of Egypt, was depicted as the falcon or the hawk. And of course the angel stories are legion. In the Bible, one of the kind of hierarchy of angels is called the seraphim. Well, if you take the word back, seraph means snake or serpent. Then you have this recurring theme around the world of the serpent and the disc, the flying disc. What that flying disc is, we'll get to, or what I think it is. And the other thing that, another thing that Pierre Sabac does when he looks at the language derivation is show how the ancients used to depict, not least in areas like Egypt, they used to depict the heavens as the upper ocean. So we had the ocean on earth, and then the upper ocean, which was the heavens. And so these stories of the gods in their flying boats were depicting things going on in the sky, in the upper ocean, the heavens. And you have symbolism of the bloodline, like children of heaven and earth, they used to call them in some of the ancient texts. Children of the gods and all these things. And when you decode the symbolism, you start to see the common themes. One of the names for the gods in the ancient world was the watchers, those who watch. And so they became symbolized as an eye. And that's where you get the eye on the dollar bill and on the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States, the eye raised above the pyramid. The watchers, the gods. And there you have the watchers again on the hand of the necklace of the mysteries. And the eye of Ra and all these things that you get in Egypt. One of the ways that they symbolize this part human, part reptilian bloodline was by depicting a human torso, and then the legs turn into a snake. You see this commonly when you start to research it. Here's another couple of examples here, but there's no shortage of them. You see here the torso, and then it goes out into a snake serpent-like. There's the cobra, again, very much symbolic of the serpent gods. And you see lots of reptilian symbolism in Asia and places like that. Also, the depiction of the humans fighting giant snakes, because these reptilians are several feet taller than us, or at least significantly taller than us. It is another example of humans fighting the snake. The word Messiah comes from Mesa, so it is said. And Mesa is the crocodile in the Nile. And they used to anoint the pharaohs with the fat of the Nile crocodile. In fact, the word Christ means anointed one. And they use the same symbolic rituals to this day, crowning the monarch of Britain. In the Bible, like here in Revelation, you get the devil depicted in reptilian terms. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. It's one of those things that once you start to open your mind to this theme, you realize it's everywhere. All these old fairy stories about princesses kissing a frog and it turns into a prince and all this stuff, all relate to this same basic symbolism. And since I've started talking about this, people have sent me pictures from around the world of the depiction of this in statues and stuff, like this one with the reptile and the humans, the part non-human, part human, again, same here. And the gargoyles and stuff, that this these elite bloodlines put on their castles and their churches and their mansions and stuff, all depictions of these gods. And then if you look at modern culture, the reptilian themes are just all over the place in the last 20 years. Recently, there's this portrait in the National Portrait Gallery in London of Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, though she was no more a virgin than Madonna, to be honest. And what's happened is she was holding some flowers. But with the passage of wear and tear, the paint has worn away, and the flowers can be seen to have been painted over a snake that she was holding. This is a computer representation of what it would have looked like in its prime form. The newspapers in Britain were saying, why was she holding a snake? Well, maybe I can help you there, guys. Maybe I can help you. And then you look at the coats of arms of these aristocratic bloodlines around the world, not least in Britain. And again you see the dragon or the flying reptile depicted. One of the great centers of this global control system is the City of London. Not the great span of London, but that part of London, the original City of London, where the financial district is, where St. Paul's Cathedral is, which is a country. People don't realize this. The City of London financial district is a country within a country. It's like the Vatican within Italy, within Rome. They don't tell you that, but it's true. It has its own police force, and it is absolutely controlled by secret societies like the Knights Templar. And the Knights Templar symbol is the red cross on the white background. And the symbol of the City of London, the financial district, is this. Flying reptiles holding the symbol of the Knights Templar Secret Society. That's what you pass when you enter the City of London on either side of the road. Then you get the same theme around the world in culture after culture of reptiles or reptilian imagery eating humans. This is one from Central America. This is another one. And again, the snake with the crown, the royal bloodline, the hybrid. This is painted by Credo Mutra on the side of his hut, depicting African legends of the serpents eating humans. And there's Alfa Romeo, look, there you go. And there's the red cross on the white background. You find this imagery in lots of logos owned by the Illuminati bloodlines. This is Silvio Berlusconi's mansion, or one of them, the leader of Italy. What are the Italians doing? I don't know. Are they drunk or what? I don't know. And there's the same imagery there in his mansion garden. Another element of this story is that these entities operating just outside of human sight feed off human emotional energy. We have become their power source in so many ways. And a few years, or quite many years ago now, I saw that Disney movie, Disney, Illuminati company, that Disney movie, Monsters, Inc., where it depicted this, it was an animated movie, it depicted this monster world, and the monster world did not have an energy source. So they had this power station in the monster world, but the power station consisted of a series of doors, symbolic of interdimensional gateways, and these monster people working in this power factory used to walk through these doors, and when they did, they entered a child's bedroom. It's supposed to be a children's movie. And what they did then was they frightened the child screamed, they caught the scream energy in this like tube, and they took it back through the door to the monster world to power the monster world. And in the most basically symbolic way, that's what's going on. They're feeding off our energy, which explains a lot as we go along of why the world is as it is. I've got a friend in Japan, lots of people will have come across by now, called Mr. Emoto. And he's become famous for getting a canister of water and putting like words written on the side of it, or putting a mobile phone on the side of it, then freezing that water very, very quickly. I've seen his studio in Tokyo where he does it. and then photographing the water crystals in that water before they obviously melt. And that kind of putting words on the side of the canister is what I was talking about in the first section. We see a word like love or hate, but what it is a vibration. And if you put the word hate or I want to kill you in words, write them, they will vibrate that energy. And by freezing the water and then filming the crystals immediately, you pick up what those words and mobile phones or whatever have done to that water. And this is a water crystal photographed after words of love and appreciation were put on the side of the water. This is a water crystal after "you make me sick, I will kill you" was put on the side of the canister. In other words, mental and emotional states manifest in very different vibrational forms. And it's like everything with radio stations or television, whatever. If you want to access a vibration, you have to be on that vibration. And the vibration that these entities are operating at means that if they are going to absorb human energy, it has to be at the low end of human emotion. It has to be that rather than that, because they can't access that. It's vibrating too quickly. So they've structured society to create maximum low vibrational emotion based around fear, anger, frustration, stress, depression, to create this constant supply of energy. And all these stories of vampires and all the rest of it all come from these entities, which still today, they're doing rituals around the world. We're talking some of the most famous people in the world are doing these rituals, which I'll talk about in the next section. Then you have another theme with these entities, which is of changing shape, what is known as shape-shifting. And I've got ridiculed around the world for saying that these entities can shape-shift, or appear to. Not because I've kind of sat there in a darkened room and worked it out, but because of the number of people around the world who've told me of their experience of seeing someone in a human form turn into a reptilian form and then back again. And of course, because if you want to control people and put them in a box, one of the most effective ways of doing it is to suppress massively their sense of what is possible. And if you therefore get people to believe that this is a solid world and all the rest of it, you are dramatically limiting what they perceive to be possible, because it's all solid. And people say to me, you can't go from a solid shape to another solid shape. Do you know, I agree with you, you can't, but that's not what's happening. This is why the first section today is so important before I talked about anything else. The shift takes place not in the physical realm, because there is no physical realm. It takes place at the energetic information waveform level and is then decoded through to the holographic. So you're decoding the human level, which is the one that's there when the process starts. There's then a shift of information and the reptilian level comes forward and you start decoding that. To the observer, it's gone from human solid to reptilian solid and back again, but that's only gone on in here. The shape shift happens on an energetic waveform level, because we're holographic we're looking at, and this is where the shape shift takes place, in the decoding mechanism. That's why it's possible. So, the road to global tyranny. We're going to go into some bizarre bloody things now, I'll tell you in the next few minutes, next few half an hour or so, crikey. The road to tyranny. We started out, as the ancients talk of, with great common themes, with a world that was very different from this one, like the blue people in the Avatar movie. And then came this schism, this dramatic energetic distortion of this part of the information construct we call the universe. And one of the things that happened immediately when this distortion happened is it came through to the holographic as massive, massive geological upheavals. These are talked about in every single ancient culture bar none, including the Bible with the Great Flood and all that stuff. But the Great Flood in the Bible is just one version of endless versions around the world. They talk about fantastic volcanoes, massive earthquakes, the earth turning over, spinning over, tipping over, and a gigantic tidal wave that enveloped the earth. And this all came from this schism. And of course, the most famous story is in the Bible of Noah and all the rest of it, but there are other names for Noah all over the world. What happened with this schism is our natural connection to higher levels of awareness became subject to that distortion. And we went from being what we were in the days of, if you like, the Avatar movie, and more, this force got control of our psyche, our minds, our perceptions, and our planet, if you like. And what has happened, and I'll explain this in more detail in a minute, is very similar to what happens in China. People in China cannot access vast tracts of the internet because the Chinese authorities have firewalled off the Chinese computer system so it cannot access vast tracts of the World Wide Web. What this force did after the schism, and as the Earth started to recover and a new society emerged, was to genetically manipulate humanity in what we call modern man, so that we were intelligent enough to be slaves, but not intelligent enough to realize what was going on, en masse anyway. And so what happened is that basically our reality was firewalled off. We are not accessing today anything like the range of frequency that we were before, but I'll get into more detail about that in a minute. So we fell into this tiny, tiny, narrow band of awareness, which is keeping us in a frequency range that is almost infinitesimal compared with what's available in this universe. And one of the key ways they did it is to put the soldiers on the door to lock us in the left side of the brain, which put us even deeper into this bewildered state where you can go to Sydney, Australia, New York, London, you can stop people on the street and say, who are you? Where are you? Where do you come from? And if they don't give you an immediate religious response, they'll probably say, I don't know. I don't know. I thought we were on the cutting edge of human awareness and we don't even know who we are, where we are, and what we're doing here. That's the level of suppression we're dealing with. And this control system was put into place, which has basically turned most humans into computer terminals on a firewalled reality. And we then, therefore, decode into experience a fraction of what we used to. Okay, the reptilian thing is crazy, it's daft, he's mad. Well, I'm about to get madder. I'm about to get more crazy. Moonshine control. Do you know, as I was putting this together over the years, and when I say put it together, it's the pieces in the puzzle just coming to me in various ways. And I've started to recognize this synchronicity when it happens. I knew that this reptilian race had created devastation on Earth. I knew that they had then destroyed the previous society and constructed their own as the Earth began to settle down. The question was, how the hell did they do it? How did they create devastation on Earth? And then I'm writing my latest book, which came out a few months ago in English. And I sat down at the computer to work one morning, and then the energy in the room changed. I've had this happen all the time over the years. The energy in the room changed, and suddenly this very powerful thought came through my head: the moon is not real. The moon is not real. The moon is a construct. Probably a hollowed out planetoid, it turns out. So I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, the moon's not real. Anyway, because of 20 years of experience, I didn't dismiss it, because I've been there before and things have proved to be accurate as a result. So I went immediately onto Google and put in words relating to the Earth not being, to the moon not being what we think it is. And within a few minutes, I came across a book telling me about supporting that. And this process of sitting at the computer and stuff like that I've just described goes back 20 years. Knowledge will be put into his mind, and at other times he will be led to knowledge. This is a common process. I mean, if it just happened to me for the first time, you might dismiss it, but it's happened so often, I went with it. And in a few seconds on the internet, this is what I found. A book called Who Built the Moon by these two researchers, Christopher Knight and Alan Butler. This guy, Christopher Knight, has done books on Freemasonry, and I think he is a Freemason, actually. And they talk about the fact that there are these fantastic anomalies about the moon that no one can answer, and in fact, the moon shouldn't be there. And it's funny, again, you know what I talked earlier about the blank sheet of paper? It's really important, because you're born into this world, and naturally you accept the world as it is that you're born into, and the moon comes up, and it goes through its cycle, and all the rest of it. Well, what about the moon? Well, it's the moon, mate, and it's always been there. Well, actually, probably, well, it almost definitely has not. Even the way the moon goes around physically has fundamental impacts on Earth. The angle of the moon, of the Earth, the speed of spin of the Earth, the effect on tides, and we're 60 to 70% water anyway on the so-called physical level. But the moon is not just physical. That's only the decoded level of it that we're seeing in the sky in apparently a physical holographic state. The moon, like everything else, is in its base state an information construct in a waveform state. And therefore, we decode it through into what appears to be the physical moon here. This is important when looking at this energetic distortion. Because when the moon came in, much more recently than science accepts, very much more recently, probably hundreds of thousands of years, maybe even a bit more, maybe a bit longer, but not millions. And as it came in its information state, its waveform state, it distorted the information balance of this part of the universe, relating to where we live, Earth and the solar system, etc. And that distortion became the great cataclysmic events that all the ancient cultures talk about. And what do they say as a common theme? During these cataclysms, the Earth flipped over, which is what it would do when this came into where it is now, and its effect on the Earth. We have the seasons today in relation to the Earth because of the moon, because of the effect on the angle of the Earth in relation to the sun. And what happened then, as this happened, this distortion happened, and it came through to the holographic devastation, is that society we call the Golden Age Society, the Avatar movie society. This schism took us back to what we call the Stone Age, to basics. And people think that's fantastic. Imagine a Haiti earthquake all over the world. You know, you're saying, when are the rescuers going to come? There are no rescuers. They're under rubble as well. And of course, as the Earth moved, what would that create? On an Earth overwhelmingly made up of oceans, a fantastic tidal wave, all of which is described in the ancient texts. And if we went through this now, this modern society, gone overnight, in a flash. And the other thing this distortion did was distorted our psyches and the way we decode reality, our perception. And this is Credo Mutwa at his home in the Kalahari region of South Africa. Saw him a few weeks ago. And he was saying that the Zulu African legends say that when the moon came, humanity went crazy. which is what it would have done. The effect on the human psyche of the moon is much misunderstood and underestimated. So we had this schism. The golden age human became the fall of man human. That's what we're looking at. That's what we're talking about. And also in Who Built the Moon, they describe the extraordinary mathematics and synchronicity of mathematics and size and everything between the moon, the earth, and the sun. Doesn't work with any of the other planets, just those three. As they say in the book, the maths involved in the Earth-Moon-Sun system is nothing less than staggering. And it says the moon has been placed where it is with the accuracy of the proverbial Swiss watchmaker. It's in such a place that during an eclipse, when viewed from the Earth, it is the same size as the sun. Accident? It's apparently 400 times smaller than the sun and 400 times nearer the sun than the Earth. Or something like that. 400 keeps coming up. This is what they say in the book. The moon is bigger than it should be, apparently older than it should be, and much lighter in mass than it should be. It occupies an unlikely orbit and is so extraordinary that all existing explanations for its presence are fraught with difficulties, and none of them could be considered remotely watertight. This is the official version, or two official versions, of how the moon was created. It was said that when the Earth was forming, a Mars-type planet smacked into it, a chunk broke away and became the moon. This became known in science as the whack theory. However, the physics of that didn't work out, so they came up with the double whack theory. This is that the Mars-type planet hit the Earth, went away, came back and hit it again. Give you a right, I'll give you a left. There you go, got a moon, there you go. The truth is they haven't got a clue where the moon came from. This is Isaac Asimov, a Russian professor of biochemistry who wrote a lot about the moon. We cannot help but come to the conclusion that the moon by rights ought not to be there. The fact that it is one of those strokes of luck almost too good to accept. Small planets such as Earth with weak gravitational fields might well lack satellites. In general then, when a planet does have satellites, those satellites are much smaller than the planet itself. Therefore, even if the Earth has a satellite, there would be every reason to suspect that at best it would be a tiny world, perhaps 30 miles in diameter. But that is not so. Earth not only has a satellite, but it is a giant satellite, 160 miles in diameter. How is it then that tiny Earth has one? Amazing. And the more I looked at this and read about it, the more I went, whoa, I didn't know that. This scientist, Erwin Shapiro from the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, the best explanation for the moon is observational error. The moon doesn't exist. NASA scientist Robin Brett, it seems easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than its existence. Where did it come from? And then there's the evidence that the moon is hollow. For instance, when in November 1969, NASA set up seismometers and then intentionally crashed a lunar module into the moon, causing an impact equivalent to 1 ton of TNT. The shock waves built up, and NASA scientists said the moon rang like a bell. Maurice Ewing, a co-director of the seismic experiment, told a news conference, "As for the meaning of it, I'd rather not make an interpretation right now, but it is as though someone had struck a bell, say in the belfry of a church, a single blow, and found that the reverberation from it continued for 30 minutes. Frank Press from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the MIT, said that for a rather small impact to produce an effect that lasted for 30 minutes was quite beyond the range of our experience. NASA scientist Gordon MacDonald said in the early 1960s that it would seem that the moon is more like a hollow than a homogeneous sphere. Sean Solomon of the MIT said the lunar orbiter experiments had vastly improved knowledge of the moon's gravitational field and indicated the frightening possibility that the moon might be hollow. Later, they had a launch vehicle strike the moon with the equivalent of 11 tons of TNT. And NASA scientists said the moon reacted like a gong and continued to vibrate for 3 hours and 20 minutes to a depth of 25 miles. Ken Johnson, a supervisor of the Data and Photo Control Department during the Apollo missions, told the Who Built the Moon author Alan Butler that the moon not only rang like a bell, but the whole moon wobbled in such a precise way that it was almost as though it had gigantic hydraulic damper struts inside it. And as the great American cosmologist Carl Sagan said, a natural satellite cannot be a hollow object. These two scientists from the Soviet Academy of Sciences wrote a long article in the 1970s in something called Sputnik magazine, headed, "Is the Moon the Creation of Alien Intelligence?" This is the 1970s. They pointed out that the outer surface of the moon is extremely hard and contains minerals like titanium. Moon rocks have been found to contain processed metals, including brass and mica, and the elements uranium-236 and neptunium-237, that have never been found to occur naturally. Uranium-236 is a long-lived radioactive nuclear waste and is found in spent nuclear fuel and reprocessed uranium. Neptunium-237 is a radioactive metallic element and a byproduct of nuclear reactors and the production of plutonium, naturally occurring then. Some lunar rocks, the scientists pointed out, have been found to contain 10 times more titanium than titanium-rich rocks on Earth. Titanium is used in supersonic jets, deep-diving submarines, and spacecraft. Dr. Harold Urey, the winner of the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, said he was terribly puzzled by the rocks from the moon, and particularly their titanium content. He said the samples were mind-blowers and that he could not account for the titanium. The scientists wrote this, the Soviet scientists: if a material had to be devised to protect a giant artificial satellite from the unfavorable effects of temperature, cosmic radiation, and meteorite bombardment, the experts would probably have hit upon precisely these, what are called refractory metals. In that case, is it not clear why lunar rock is such an extraordinarily poor heat conductor, a factor which so amazed astronauts? Wasn't that what the designers of this super Sputnik of the Earth were after? From the engineer's point of view, this spaceship of ages long past, which we call the moon, is superbly constructed. If you are going to launch an artificial Sputnik, then it is advisable to make it hollow. At the same time, it would be naive to imagine that anyone capable of such a tremendous space project would be simply satisfied with some kind of giant empty trunk hurled into near-Earth trajectory. It is more likely that what we have here is a very ancient spaceship, the interior of which was filled with fuel for the engines, materials and appliances for repair work, navigation instruments, observation equipment, and all manner of machinery. In other words, anything necessary to enable this caravel of the universe to serve as a Noah's Ark of intelligence, perhaps even as the home of a whole civilization, envisaging a prolonged, thousands of millions of years existence and long wanderings through space, thousands of millions of miles. Naturally, the hull of such a spaceship must be super tough in order to stand up to the blows of meteorites and sharp fluctuations between extreme heat and extreme cold. Probably the shell is a double-layered affair, the basis a dark armoring of about 20 miles in thickness, and the outside of it some kind of more loosely packed covering, a thinner layer averaging about 3 miles. In certain areas where the lunar seas and craters are, the upper layer is quite thin, in some cases non-existent. And what's they found with the craters on the moon is no matter how wide they are and how big the impact was, the depth of them is pretty universal, in the region of 3 miles, that kind of thing. And what the Soviet scientists were saying was the reason for that is when it's impacted, it goes down so far on that outer layer and then hits that 20-mile thick, as they say, layer and can't go any further. And so you have a universal depth of crater, despite the fact that the power of the strike can be very different. And this guy, Dr. Anderson, professor of geophysics and director of seismological laboratory at the California Institute of Technology, said, the moon is made inside out. In other words, what's on the surface should be inside. Hollowed out moon. So I called Credo Mutua when I put this together. I didn't tell him anything I was thinking, anything I'd come across. I just said to him, can you tell me any African legends about the moon? Well, first of all, a number of African tribes say that they go back to before the time the moon was there. So do other tribes around the world. But he said, we symbolize the moon as an egg. And again, modern anthropologists would hear that and go, oh, they're primitive, they think the moon's an egg. The reason they symbolize it as an egg is they say it's been hollowed out. The yolk's been taken out. And this was the story he told me. He's told me some more since I've seen him. The legends of the moon say that the moon was brought here hundreds of generations ago by two brothers, Wawani and Mpanku, who were the leaders of the Chitahuri, the children of the serpent, the Reptilians. And they were known as the Water Brothers and had, quote, scaly skin like a fish. Now, when you go up to Sumer, in what we now call Iraq, and you read what's on the Sumerian tablets found over the last 100, 200 years, they talk about the Anunnaki and two brothers that led the Anunnaki called Enki and Enlil. And at least Enki was associated with water. The Zulu, so it's the same story basically in theme in Sumer as you find in Africa, southern Africa. Zulu legends tell of Wawani and Mpanku how they stole the moon in the form of an egg from the great fire dragon and emptied the yolk out until it was hollow. Then they rolled the moon across the sky to the earth and caused cataclysmic events on this planet. And the legends also say that the Chitahuri said, if you don't do what we say, we'll move the moon. And have an impact on the Earth that way. Now, this book was written in the 1970s, Our Mysterious Spaceship Moon, by a guy called Don Wilson. And he says that if you take this theme about the moon, instead of what we're told the moon is, it starts to explain all this long list, this is just some of them, long list of anomalies about the moon. Like why the moon is a freak world, too big and too far out to be a natural satellite of the Earth. Why the moon has such shallow craters. Why some moon rocks are older than Earth and at least as old as the solar system. Why the moon seems inside out. Why the moon vibrates like a huge gong, transmitting tremors great distances around and through itself. How the moon can produce so many contradictions of data and findings. And more recently, I mean, you wake up one morning, you put on the television or open the newspaper, and they say, NASA's announced it's going to bomb the moon. It's going to what? It's going to bomb the moon. Looking for water. Yeah, okay. And then, I don't know if you saw this story, that about 3 weeks ago, NASA announced that the moon is shrinking. It was in the mainstream media. The moon is shrinking. And they said this is happening in what we would call modern times. What they found is these ridges all over the moon, not just in one little area, all over the moon, where the surface is being pushed up over itself because the moon's shrinking. The moon's shrinking, and then they're bombing it. What's happening? And there's things on the moon that non-natural phenomena on the moon that's been kept from us. Never mind in the moon, where I say the real deal is, on the moon as well. This guy, Sergeant Carl Wolf, was a precision electronics photographic equipment engineer based at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. That's the CIA Air Force Base. That's where the planes were sent to not stop the attack on the Pentagon. Didn't get there in time. Oh, missed it. There you go. And he appeared at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., with others, to talk about his experiences on the inside and what he saw. And he said that one day he was called across to one part of Langley Air Force Base to, I think it was to repair some technology of some kind. And he met a man who was putting together what they call mosaics. As pictures of the moon were taken, they would take strips of them and then put them together to create a whole mass. And Carl Wolf said then what happened when he got there. He said, then this man who was doing these mosaics, then he pulled out one of these mosaics and showed this base, which had geometrical shapes that were towers. What the man told him when he said, come and look at this, he said, we found an alien base on the moon, far side of the moon. They were spherical buildings, these towers. They were very tall towers and things that looked somewhat like radar dishes, but they were large structures. If I compare it to what I've seen now, because I do have photographs that have artifacts in them that are similar to what I saw, they're massive. Some of the structures are half a mile in size, so they're huge structures. Some of the buildings seem to have very reflective surfaces on them. A couple of structures that I saw reminded me of cooling towers at power generating plants. They had that sort of shape. Some of them were just very, very straight and tall with a flat top. Some of them were round. Some of them looked like a Quonset hut with a dome, like a kind of greenhouse. The particular shot that I saw, there were several clustered together over a landscape, a fairly large landscape. And other people who spoke said similar things about the fact that artifacts non-natural on the moon had been airbrushed out of the photographs by NASA before the public saw them. Some of them not very well. This documentary, Moon Rising, talked to a lot of people on the inside about their experiences of the moon. And this was what one NASA insider said: we lied about everything. Well, they'd have to, otherwise they'd have to tell the truth. And these are some of the pictures that the Moon Rising points out, where there's something behind that, and they've just like blocked it out. Not even very well. Same with this. What's behind that? And then you've got this. What's this on the moon? It's certainly not something that looks in any way natural. And according to photographic experts who've looked at this, this is so big, it's about 10 times the size of Los Angeles. Their quote, not mine. What the heck is it? Then there's these towers that are all airbrushed out, so you can't actually see what they really are in detail. And when I started looking at this, my mind turned to the Star Wars movies, which were created by a massive Illuminati insider called George Lucas. And one of the themes of the movies was the Death Star, which looked uncannily like the moon. And the Death Star would be moved in to target planets, would have the ability to destroy them if it wanted. And the whole of the inside of the Death Star was where a whole civilization lived that moved around causing mayhem. I would say that that was basically what the moon is. And this is a moon of Mars called Mimas, and this is the Death Star. Staggering like coincidence. And since I've finished the book and that the pieces have continued to move, Saturn is coming into this as well. And the reason why Saturn has so many moons. I think that with the passage of more research, we're going to find there's a reason why that has so many moons, and the fact that those moons may not be natural either, or at least some of them. This is a necklace, a Zulu necklace that is as old, Credo Mutwa says, as the necklace of the mysteries. This is called the necklace of the moons, because they are saying that there are many of these moons that are similar, some smaller, as the moon we have. And this symbolizes humanity and control by the moon, our moon. But there are many moons, they say, and that's why they symbolize it. Now, Phobos, one of the moons of Mars, has been talked about recently as possibly being a hollowed-out asteroid in a similar way as the moon. And back as far as 1963, this guy, Richard Wilson, Chief of Applied Mathematics at NASA, said that Phobos might be a colossal base orbiting Mars. In one of the Star Trek episodes, there was a theme of a hollowed-out asteroid, which was been created into a spaceship and for a group of like civilization. And so many things in these so-called sci-fi movies are based on fact. As the Who Built the Moon book points out in great detail, the mathematics and geometry and positioning of the moon, the earth, and the sun is fantastic. They also say that they found that the moon falls into a kind of measurement which has become known as the megalithic yard. This was discovered by a man called Alexander Thom. He was a Scottish engineer who studied a stream of stone circles like Stonehenge around Europe, and found that they were built to a measurement, a unit of measurement, which he called the megalithic yard. According to these authors of this book, the moon falls into that geometry. As they say in the book, this all seemed very odd. The megalithic structures that were built across Western Europe were frequently used to observe the movements of the sun and the moon. But how could the unit of measure upon which these structures were based be so beautifully integer to the circumference of these bodies as well as the earth? Because he says it applies to the earth and the sun as well. Well, this unit of measure could well be because these great ancient structures that we think, how were they built in the ancient world, were actually built with help from these entities that use that measurement. And it's my feeling that these great megalithic structures, including the pyramids, were not put there for benevolent reasons, necessarily. They were put there to suppress the Earth's energy grid. Because like I said at the very early on, the idea has been to suppress the information in the form of photon energy that is passing through the ley line network of the Earth, and therefore we're picking that up, and through the human body computer. And wherever the reptilian theme comes up around the world, so do pyramids. They were the pyramid builders. And the idea I would suggest is to of putting these things on certain points where lots of these lines cross to suppress the level of information and frequency that we can access. And when you see these fantastic structures like in Peru, where these stones, hundreds of tons in weight, are put together and you couldn't get a piece of paper between them. These were done by these ancient people. How did they do that? Because there was another influence that history has written out of the show. How did the people on the Nazca Plains of Peru produce these amazing depictions of animals and insects with one continuous line scored out of the landscape when you can only see some of these from 1,000, 2,000 feet in an aeroplane in their entirety? Because there was an input of a much higher, not consciousness, no, intelligence that knew how to manipulate reality to make that happen. Now, if what I've said so far is fantastic, I'm going to be even more fantastic. Because all I can do is communicate how the synchronicity of life and information and what it's putting towards me. After 20 years of it happening, you recognize very clearly when something's being put towards you and say, look at this is important. It seems to me, and I'll go into detail as we go along here, that it's not just the fact that the moon is there that's affecting life on Earth, though just being there alone is massively affecting us, but something's coming out of the moon in the form of frequency fields which are affecting our reality. Not least, it's the source of the firewall that is cutting us off from great areas of perception that we had before but don't have now. Again, the moon is, in its base form, a vibrational field. We decode it into physical, but it's vibrational. Like I say, the fact that it's there is affecting us massively, but I'm saying we go further than that. There is a broadcast signal or frequency field that is being broadcast to the Earth, which is acting like a firewall. Can't say I know exactly how it works, I wouldn't claim that, but the theme is becoming clear. Because what you have is information coming from the sun in the form of photons. The idea is to create a field, in effect manipulating the Earth's magnetic field, that is shutting out chunks of the frequencies available, therefore the information available, that is coming to us from the sun in the form of photons. And in doing that, they are doing what the Chinese authorities have done with the internet. They are firewalling off great swathes of information that we would, left to our own devices, be decoding into a much more expanded sense of reality. And what I call the moon matrix, this firewall, is creating this secular society where we are operating in such a narrow band of our potential. I mean, just think about it. We are consciousness. All that is, has been, and ever can be, and yet, as my brother said to me the other month, he said, what's this life, because he's not into any of this stuff, but what's this life all about, Dave? He says, you get up in the morning, and you go to work, and you do a job you don't really want to do. And then you come home, and you have your tea, and you watch the telly, and then you go to bed, and you get up, you go to work, do a job you don't really want. How many people go through life like that? They're not living. They are existing. They're surviving. They're getting through. Is that all we're capable of? Of course not. But we're being suppressed and manipulated so that this infinite consciousness that we are gets locked into this bloody round and round and round and round mundane lifestyle where we're serving like slaves. And this is affecting our energy field. And therefore how we decode reality in a much narrower band than we normally would. Just as computer games, virtual reality games, hijack the five senses and put another reality into the body computer, so it's being done to us, and I would say, at least to a large part, via the moon. I'll get into this, I'll go into more detail as we go along. Like I say, you have this base vibration, which then elicits information in the form of photons, and as the vibration changes, so the information changes. And like in China, they have firewalled it off through the moon, so we're not accessing that anymore. And it's interesting that one of the things the magnetic field of the Earth does is it deflects away large amounts of solar radiation. It's what it does. And some people will say, and I understand it, well, it's a good job it does, or we get fried. And in some frequency ranges, yes, we would. What I'm saying is that a lot of stuff that is being artificially deflected by manipulation of the Earth's magnetic field from the moon, at least to a large part, it's stopping us receiving photon information on frequencies that we would normally receive it, and therefore we are not accessing that information. Boom! This is a strange thing that people argue about what it means. It's at a place called Dendera, near Luxor, and it's called the Dendera Light. And they're saying, are these ancient depictions of lights and what have you, with the snake in the middle? I don't know what it symbolizes, but I know what it symbolizes to me. This band of frequency which is firewalled off and controlled by this reptilian entities. These are reptilian entities from the moon, which is holding humanity in a band of frequency which allows us to be en masse controlled, manipulated, and suppressed through lack of knowledge, lack of awareness, and not least through suppression of right brain information. And if people think that we can't be cut off from knowledge and even visual levels of awareness by high technology, well, how about this? This was in the New Scientist a few months ago, this mainstream science magazine in Britain. And this is what it said. In America, a little while ago, a few months ago, they switched from analog television to digital television. And this was the result. New Scientist magazine, prior to the switchover, naturally occurring radio waves at frequencies between 700 and 800 megahertz were obscured by analog TV signals, preventing astronomers from investigating the universe using this band. The freeing up of this bandwidth is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see galaxies in this range. That's before they hand the frequencies over to mobile phone companies and so on. So here we are, with astronomers unable to see galaxies within the frequency range of 700 and 800 megahertz because Americans were watching the television. What on earth could they do with the kind of technology and technological advanced situation that we're talking about here to cut us off from sight and perception purely through vibrational means? I'm saying that we're being controlled in precisely that way. And when you open to consciousness, it's what the awakening's happening. When you open to consciousness, you're moving beyond the frequency range of this firewall. And thus, in that expanded state of consciousness, you can see what those still within the firewall frequency cannot see, and that's the reason they call you crazy. It's like we're operating in a vibrational bubble, the moon matrix, within the bigger bubble of what we call the universe. And the moon is affecting, as we said earlier, the third eye and our ability to decode reality and go beyond five-sense reality in the way we naturally should. So if we go back to this scene in the Matrix, it's, I would say, more accurate to say, the moon matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room. You can see it when you look in out your window, you turn on your television, you can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. Exactly. We've been put in a vibrational prison. And even, like I say, forget the moon matrix, just the fact the moon is here is having phenomenal impacts on our sense of reality on all levels, the cycles of the moon. On the endocrine system, the moon fundamentally affects our hormonal systems, the endocrine system glands, two of which, of course, are the pineal gland and the pituitary gland of the third eye. That's just by its physically being there. And we're being closed down from our natural multisensory self in this way, and through the closing of the third eye and the shutting down of consciousness, being put into this limited mode. So the moon matrix, moonth, moon, moonth. The moon, we talked earlier about the effect of time on our sense of reality. Well, our sense of time is fundamentally affected by the moon being there, because it's affecting the speed the Earth's spinning, for a start. And then you have the bloodlines, they're the monarchy, the monarchy's the monarchy. And then you have Mooney, money, which is a fundamental part of the control system to deny us choice and make us slaves. Years ago, back in the early 90s, I was in America, and I came across this movie. It was a B movie, but it was fascinating to me because I thought there's a lot of truth in this. Now, there's a hell of a lot of truth in it. Now I see this perspective. But it was produced by a man called John Carpenter, another insider. And when you look at his movie-making history into Satanism and horror movies and this one, you can see that he knows more than most people. And he has worked with George Lucas on the Star Wars movies. The story of They Live is this. It came out in, I think, 1988, something like that. And it was set about now in the future. There was a massive economic collapse, and people were out of work. People were living in tent cities in America. They are. And this guy, the star of the movie, if you like, was a builder, but he was walking from town to town trying to get work as a builder. So the movie opens with him walking into this city. He gets some temporary work on this building site, and at the end of the day, this big black guy says to him, another builder, "Do you have anywhere to stay?" He said, "No." He said, "Well, it's not much, but you can stay where I stay." So they go to this clearing, a wasteland, and there's just corrugated iron makeshift houses and tents, homes and tents, not houses. And he notices, the first thing he found strange was they'd rigged up like a makeshift television, a black and white, flickering on and off in this little makeshift village. And there's a program going on, and suddenly it cuts out, and this man's face is there. And he says, "They're here, they're among us. We can't see what they look like, but they're among us, and they're controlling us." And it got cut out back to the program. And this guy noticed that some strange things were happening at the church across the road by people that lived in this village, this temporary village. So when they go over there, he sneaks in, and the church music's playing, and there's like a choir singing, but he nips around the corner and looks, and it's a tape, not a church at all. And he sees these cardboard boxes. But someone started to come near him, so he got away before they could see him. That night, the police state move in. Black helicopters, bulldozers, police, and they destroy this town, this village, temporary village. He comes back the next day after it's all settled down, and he sneaks into this church to see what was in these boxes. So he grabs a box, runs off into an alleyway, opens it up, and inside it's all sunglasses. So he thinks, sunglasses, what a waste of time. So he puts one in his pocket, throws the rest in the trash can, and walks out into the main street. And then he puts the glasses on. And the world is suddenly very different. This is what he can see. With his eyes, these are adverts. But instead, through the glasses, he sees that they're saying, watch TV, submit, consume, stay asleep, conform. All these subliminal things that are fired at us all the time. No independent thought. He looks at news magazines and newspapers, and he sees the same thing. And then someone comes up to buy a newspaper, and they don't look human through the glasses as they look human through his eyes. And he realizes, as he watches the president make a speech through the glasses, the president's not human. And many of the police are not human. And the people in the media, many of them, are not human. And the story runs and runs and runs till they realize that there is a frequency being broadcast from the top of the television tower in this city, which is having the effect on the human brain of preventing it from decoding the frequencies which would allow them to see what is going on. But the glasses overcome that. And they destroy the dish, and suddenly people are seeing who's sitting next to them. And who they're having sex with. That'd be a surprise, wouldn't it? He looks very different. I must have had too much to drink. And I'm saying that theme is what's coming from the moon, and it's affecting our ability to read reality. Now, let's take this to the next stage. We live not just in a left brain world, we live in a reptilian world. And I'll explain why. Carl Sagan, the great American cosmologist, he wrote a book called The Dragons of Eden about the effect on human behavior of our reptilian genetics. Because although there are hybrid bloodlines with a greater infusion of reptilian genetics, all of our body computers, I would suggest, not least because of the genetic manipulation, have a are tremendously influenced by reptilian genetics. The core part of the brain here, into the center of the brain, is called by scientists the reptilian brain, or the R complex. And it's through this, I would suggest, I'll come to this in a minute, that we are controlled by the moon matrix and by the structure of society in general. There was a series of books written in the 1960s and 70s by a guy called Carlos Castaneda, in which he was quoting a shaman in Central America called Don Juan Matus. There's some people that say he didn't exist, the shaman, but whatever, the words put into his mouth, whether he existed or not, are absolutely spot on. I read these passages I'm going to show in a second after I'd concluded that we're being controlled by this serpent race through control of our psyches. And this is what Castaneda quoted this shaman source as saying. We have a predator that came from the depths of the cosmos and took over the rule of our lives. Human beings are its prisoners. The predator is our lord and master. It has rendered us docile, helpless. If we want to protest, it suppresses our protest. If we want to act independently, it demands that we don't do so. Indeed, we are held prisoner. They took us over because we are food to them, and they squeeze us mercilessly because we are their sustenance. Just as we rear chickens in coops, the predators rear us in human coops, human eros. Therefore, their food is always available to them. Food, energy, human emotional energy. Think for a moment and tell me how you would explain the contradictions between the intelligence of man, the engineer, and the stupidity of his systems of belief, or the stupidity of his contradictory behavior. Sorcerers believe that the predators have given us our system of beliefs, our ideas of good and evil, our social mores. They are the ones who set up our dreams of success or failure. This is the monopoly I talked about earlier, the round and round the garden. They gave us covetousness, greed, and cowardice. It is the predator who makes us complacent, routinary, and egomaniacal. In order to keep us obedient and meek and weak, the predators engage themselves in a stupendous maneuver. Stupendous, of course, from the point of view of a fighting strategist, a horrendous maneuver from the point of view of those who suffer it. They gave us their mind. The predator's mind is baroque, contradictory, morose, filled with the fear of being discovered any minute now. They gave us their mind. And I say that's where they gave it us from and continue to give it us from. And that about fear of being discovered any moment now is because the moon society depends for its resources on the earth. It's a construct. It does not have a resource base. And this is why the earth is not only being controlled in terms of humanity, it is being raped of resources to serve the society on the moon, or in the moon, more likely. So this reptilian mind, collective mind, is the hack. It is the firewall that is cutting us off from the range of frequency, information, and perception that we had before this intervention. It's the reptilian mind that is behind the banking, political, media, business, religion, medicine system. It's what it all comes down from. It's been structured to control us, to suppress us, to keep us from the truth. It's the reptilian mind that controls the system through the computer terminals in the system that are connected to that while thinking they're freely thinking. Now, this is mainstream science. This is not me concluding this. This is mainstream science. From the reptilian brain, within the human brain, we get primitive and emotional responses. It's from that we get cold-blooded behavior and territoriality. In other words, wanting to own and control. Now, cold-blooded behavior. What is cold-blooded behavior? No empathy with the consequences for others of your actions. When you are one of these hybrids with a greater infusion of reptilian genetics, you are going to have much more cold-blooded behavior, therefore less empathy. That's why these bloodlines that are controlling this planet have no empathy. And 3,000 people dead on 9/11, what's it matter? Is the way they see it. A desire to control, an obsession with hierarchical structures of power comes from the reptilian brain. Aggression, might is right, winner takes all. The very traits of the control system. And through the reptilian brain, it has hijacked our sense of perception. The reptilian brain is all about survival, survive. It's constantly scanning the environment, looking for danger, not just physical danger, but danger for your relationship ending, danger for you losing your job, danger for you not meeting the rent at the end of the month. It's always scanning. That's where we get these feelings of anxiety from, and fear and worry, and oh my goodness, reptilian brain. There are some good parts of it, because when someone walks in front of your car and you smack the brakes on immediately, it's the reptilian brain doing that, because the reptilian brain does not think, it does not work out, it does not ponder on, it just reacts. Other parts of the brain do the working out. So if you're operating at the reptilian brain level, you're constantly reacting, emotionally reacting. When people emotionally react, and then a minute or two later or the next morning they go, I went over the top there, didn't I? What was I doing? The reptilian brain took control of their reality. Survival, fear, reaction. And therefore, this says, be afraid, the big bad monster's coming as soon as we've invented him. This means that if they can hold us in the reptilian brain as much as possible, then they have more control over us and our behavior. And how do you keep people in the reptilian brain as much as possible? You keep them in states of fear and anxiety and stress as much as possible. So, terrorism, global warming, swine flu, the economy, I don't look like her, I don't look like him, over and over and over again. Excuses to be in states of awareness or lack of it that put us here. And if they put us here, then it connects us into the moon matrix, because this is like a microchip that connects us into that reptilian brain. And it's not just about, like I say, survival physically. It's protecting status. It's protecting your power, protecting your reputation, superiority, intellectual preeminence. This all activates the reptilian brain out of fear of losing those things. But on another level, the reptilian brain also has an acquiescence to hierarchy and authority. And that's what humanity has, an acquiescence to authority, etc. Money, on both sides of it, is the reptilian brain. People say, why does someone who's got more money than they could spend in 100 lifetimes already, why do they get up with the sun every morning to earn more? Because there is an aspect of the reptilian brain, when it's at its extreme states, and these hybrid bloodlines are in an extreme state, which equates far, far, far more than necessary with a greater chance of survival. So they want more and more and more. And then there's the other end of the reptilian brain relating to money, where it's fear of not having enough. Either way, you're locked in here. And it's through the reptilian brain that overwhelmingly humanity decodes reality. And this is what Don Juan Matus said in another Castaneda book. I know that even now, though you never have suffered hunger, you have food anxiety, which is none other than the anxiety of the predator who fears that at any moment now its maneuver is going to be uncovered and its food source is going to be denied. Through the mind, which after all is their mind, the predators inject into the lives of human beings whatever is convenient for them. And they ensure, in this manner, a degree of security to act as a buffer against their fear. Sorcerers of ancient Mexico reasoned that man must have been a complete being at one point, with stupendous insights, feats of awareness that are mythological legends nowadays. Yes, exactly what we were before this intervention. And then everything seems to disappear, and we now have a sedated man. What I'm saying is what we have against us is not a simple predator. It is very smart and organized. It follows a methodical system to render us useless. Man, the magical being that he is destined to be, is no longer magical. He's an average piece of meat. There are no more dreams for man, but the dreams of an animal who is being raised to be a piece of meat of trite conventional imbecilic. This is what we're being given the opportunity to break out of now. And that's why I keep saying the control system is all about the control of perception. You control that, you control behavior, you control physically. Zulu legends and African legends say that before the moon came, humans used to perceive the sun as female. The Zulus used to call it Langa, the desired one. And then after the moon came, Credo Mutra said that this change from perceiving the sun as female turned to perceiving the sun as male and the moon as female, as another level of the change. And he says, the Zulu legend says that this change from perceiving the sun as female to worshipping it as male, quote, made possible the creation of warlike kings that took what they wanted by force. Everything changed when the perception of the sun changed. Well, it's not only the perception of the sun that changed, it's actually what we were decoding from the sun, thanks to the hack and the intervention of the moon, I would strongly say. And it's a modus operandi, it seems. What you do is you move these moons in, and what they do is have the effect of, through their effect on the planet, as they did with this one, completely raising the society that was there at the start. And then as the planet settles down after that initial collapse, you start to build a new society, not least through genetic manipulation, that is based on your collective mind dictating to the minds, just like ants and the queen ants and all that stuff, same principle. And when you look at that Avatar movie, it has all the elements. If you take the blue people to be humans as we were before the schism, before this intervention, and you take the American military who came into that moon in the Avatar movie